Hi, I'm Peter Williams. I'm the author of Productive Accidents, a playbook for personal and professional adventure. I'm a Treasury professional based in Singapore, but I'm also a serial volunteer. I'm on the board of Music for Life International based in New York and Resolve Foundation based in Hong Kong. In today's show, we're going to talk about the importance of saying yes and getting comfortable outside your comfort zone. We're going to talk about the importance of connection and how you can turn those into compound collaboration. And finally, we're going to talk about the importance of breaking down some of the lies about innovation and realizing that it should be a playful adventure and it should turn your life into an adventure. Innovation is code for making cool things happen. And the more that you play with your life and the interests that you have and the people that you get connected to, and the more diversity you have, the more powerful you're going to be at creating creativity, innovation, and value for your company, shareholders, stakeholders, and the community more broadly. So I look forward to talking to you on the show.
Welcome back to part two of our delicious conversation with Peter Williams. Peter Williams grew up in rural Australia on BMX and skateboards. He was born in rural Australia and went on to have a global career in finances. He's a serial volunteer, and he serves on boards like Music for Life International, which is New York-based, and Resolve Foundation in Hong Kong. He is an advisory to and board chair. He's an author, a speaker, and a podcast host. And his second book, which we've been talking about, is called Productive Accidents. Now, we talked a lot about that book in part one. We talked about what actually is a productive accident and why it's important to say yes. And I know we're all trying to say no more to sort of bring down our overwhelm, but why it's important to say yes to get out of our own comfort zones. And Peter talked about where innovation really comes from is in having these connections across not just platforms, but industries. You see, sometimes one of the things that I do is in my groups, I have these private masterminds, and I make sure I bring people together who are not from the same industry. And it's fascinating to me that somebody can see something when they're from one industry that the person in that industry cannot see. And Peter's talking about that as being this path to a life and to business being purely an adventure. And he's done that through volunteering, through being involved in many different things. And one of the things he's done is he threw open his doors. Now, you might think, well, there's a crazy man. He's invited people to come stay in his house. And that's what's happened for many, many years. And instead of just having a cup of coffee with somebody, they come and stay with him. Talk to us about that, Peter. Talk to us about how that started. And we don't need the gory details, right? But we want to know, like, was there that trepidation about, oh my God, I'm inviting somebody into my house, the wife's going to kill me?
That is a perfect lead into exactly what happened. So I got involved in the TEDx community when I landed in Hong Kong. There's a gentleman there called Gino Yu, and he brought TEDx to Hong Kong. And we got to know each other quite well. And Gino's an interesting character. He goes to Davos Economic Forum, then he goes to Burning Man, then he goes to TED Global, and he meets cool people, and he invites them to speak at TEDx Hong Kong. So that's why for $50, you got 90% as good an experience as a $10,000, TED Global experience, Yeah. And over time, he would just reach out randomly. And one Tuesday afternoon at 3 p.m., he kind of just wrote it and said, hey, are you in town? It's always sort of sneaks up on you. And I say, well, yeah. He said, what's going on? I said, well, I've got this guy in town. He just couch surfed around the world for 3 years making a documentary about happiness. You should meet him. And I'm like, I've got meetings that night or whatever, but I would always reschedule a meeting to switch it for something that could be life-changing, right? No big deal. So I went to that dinner, and I met this guy called Adrian Bellick. And, it turns out he grew up in Chicago and he loved BMX bikes. So we were set for the next hour. We could talk about, all the old brands, GT, Mongoose, Haro, whatever. And at the end of it, I said, hey, you're a couch surfer, where are you staying tonight? And he said, well, I'm okay tonight, but tomorrow night. And I said, all right. I instantly said, you're coming to stay with us. And then I had to go up the escalator in Hong Kong to where we lived and say to my wife, Catherine, say, look, we've got this dude with dreadlocks. He's going to come and stay with us for a while. Are you okay? and she was cool. So to be honest, she has been a core to all of this adventure, right? She's sort of sitting there accepting my craziness, and it's turned into a tradition because not long after that, I was mentoring some startups, and there was a Citi innovation sort of presentation, or I think competition going on. And one of the teams that I was mentoring was based in Miami in the US. And I got to know one of the guys there, Miles, and I eventually said, look, don't come all the way to Hong Kong for just a 2-day event. You should stay a week. Don't bother wasting your money in a hotel. You're a startup, don't burn your cash. Just stay with us. And so he did that. And every day I introduced him to like 3 or 4 people that were relevant to what he was doing. By the end of the week, he said, man, we need to start an office here. He'd made such great connections so quickly. And I always tend to try to host a dinner when you've got something interesting in town. So there's another dinner series that I've discovered through a guy that I helped with his TEDx talk called Patrick Ip. He's got a dinner series called Baller Dinners, Baller. I think he kind of regrets the name because it's, baller means, you're full of yourself in some ways, right? Top of your game. But it's got this community of 1,700 people that are prepared to host dinners anywhere in the world and to learn people's stories and to help each other without expecting anything in return. And I've hosted many of them in Hong Kong. When I go into New York, I say, look, I'm there for 5 days. I've got Thursday night free. Someone I don't even know will book the restaurant. 10 people I don't know will show up and we'll have this conversation. And it just keeps on evolving. So Eric Sim and I are about to kickstart a new version of that in Singapore on the 29th of September. And we're going to have, we'll be co-hosts. So we each invite 5 of our most interesting friends. They don't have to know each other. In fact, it's better if they don't. Because again, we're trying to amplify the differences across ourselves, because we're more likely to learn something new from someone that has barely a pixel in overlapping in terms of life experience than to have a massive overlap. So if people ask me to speak at a Treasury conference, I say, well, why would I want to do that? I'm not going to learn anything. They're not going to learn anything. But if someone asked me to invite to speak at some totally unrelated industry, then hell yeah. Like you spoke about the skill of saying no. So Derek Sivers is famous for writing, hell yeah or no. Derek and I actually had a series of emails years ago before he sort of became really famous. And my daughter was about to start guitar. And I said, what should we get, steel strings or nylon? 10 emails later, he went on to the merits of why you need steel strings to form calluses and all this stuff. So he's an interesting guy. I appreciate why he says, why he has to say no, because he's got millions of people probably reaching out to him. But in my case, when, I'm just starting out, or for younger people, see, maybe there's a life cycle of all of this, right? And you get more selective over time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm both, just from a personal perspective. I'm definitely a no if you want to do something, and I can just see that it's a ton of work for me, right? I'm a hell yes if it's something I can do that can serve something, and preferably both, where I'm going to meet somebody really interesting. And it's really interesting, and it really plays into your thing. What people don't know about me is naturally I'm introverted. So I'm not naturally an extrovert. I'm naturally an introvert, but I've trained myself to be extroverted so I can be extroverted. So when a social event comes up or an opportunity to go meet somebody, my automatic response is, no, I'm tired. I'd rather stay home, just be with a wife, rub her feet, watch the telly. I'm good, right? But I trained myself years ago to say, what if I meet my new best friend there? And my ego will say, well, of course you're not going to meet your new best friend. And my response to that is, but what if I meet somebody who introduces me to my new best friend? So I go along, and every now and then, my wife's also very introverted, but an extrovert. She looks extroverted, but she's introvert. And I'll go without her, and she'll go, how was it? And sometimes I come home and I go, yeah, it was all right. And every now and then I come back and I go, oh my God, it was amazing. I met this person who introduced me to that person. And as a result, I'm having a conversation with this person I'm going to meet for coffee tomorrow. It's that willingness to push yourself out of the comfort zone, which I think is more important than anything else that gets you to that.
And no surprise, I'm an introvert as well, but to be honest.
Right.
And the way you measure it, and I'd never heard of this before. I was in a training program, and they said, okay, describe your perfect day, write it down. And I went, oh, well, I'd be up early in the morning. I'd have an art studio. I'd be doing a painting by the ocean. I'd go for a surf. I'd play golf. I'd be in a hammock. I'd have a nice dinner with some friends. And then you go back and say, how many people are involved in that? Not so many. You know what I mean? So you get energy from being, reading, thinking, reflecting, playing, but converging, with tight, small family members and friends. But, the way I get around it is if someone says, let's go to a 100-person event, I just need one or two good conversations that are, substantial. And that turns into a series of adventures. And it literally happened in Hong Kong when our neighbor, Andrew Stetson, was the chairman of AustCham, Australian Chamber of Commerce. And he said, let's go, we've got drinks this Thursday. I met one guy that night, and it turned into a business meeting on the Wednesday, corporate drinks on the Thursday, a game of golf on the Friday. The corporate drinks on the Thursday led me to meet another guy called Morgan Parker, who was having his own midlife crisis, and he was going to ride his motorbike from Hong Kong to Australia. There's obviously some boats involved, but he stopped at 10. He stopped at 10 charities along the way, took a film crew, and turned each of those half-an-hour series into a showcasing each of those local charities. So, things like that just kept on happening. The more I just played with this idea, and it became predictable and repeatable to have this 80% of the time, something interesting evolved. And even if you meet someone and it's not immediately obvious why it's relevant, somewhere along the line, you'll be connecting that person to someone that they should know. And it becomes, like this connection momentum just keeps on building. And I'm in finance, so I guess compound interest is one concept. I'm more interested in compound collaboration.
Yeah.
Where one collaboration goes on top of another one and on top of another one, and it goes exponential.
Yeah, I really like that. The idea of it's a compound collaboration, but it's from a compound connection.
Yes.
I really get that, and that sort of resonates with me and about how I approach it. Because as you just said, when I meet somebody, I never think that that's the end of the line. I'm always thinking, who can I introduce them to? I had a conversation this morning with somebody who was a neuroscientist who I've met before briefly, and I've already written 3 introductions directly after that conversation when I realized, oh, that's the project you're working on. Let me introduce, what's in it for me? It's not about that. It's about creating these amazing networks. And the thing about today, where we live today, is we've got this. We've got Zoom. We've got visual connection. I'm not writing a letter that's going to arrive in 6 weeks in Australia that might not arrive. You can jump on a call and within however short you want to do it, and you can add value to that person's life. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is, and there's no excuses. And you just reminded me, we should talk about how we met. And I don't know if you remember, but we met through Greg Larkin and his platform, Punks and Pinstripes. And how did I meet Greg? We started a conversation on LinkedIn, and he'd written a book called This Might Get Me Fired. We arranged a phone call, and I said, you know what, you should come to Hong Kong, stay with us, and I'll organize a speaking event. Next thing you know, I'd volunteered to speak at a training program at work, and I thought it was going to be in Asia, and they said, no, can you be in New York? So I wrote to Greg and said, oh, I'm going to stay the last weekend. Where should I stay? And he went away for 30 seconds. He came back, and his wife, Pauline, from Scotland, she said, stay with us. So I literally had the best weekend in Brooklyn, and he gave me the punk rock tour of his teenage sort of years, and, priceless sort of experiences. And that was just off a connection on LinkedIn.
Yeah, there's so much of that, and again, speaking to that willingness to, to take the risk, as you just said, the willingness to take that risk, because I can't even imagine how many people I know that in random ways, and yet even as little as probably 10 years ago, if you'd have said to me, your closest friends will be people you've never hugged, and I would be like, bullshit. I'm a hugger.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
but some of my closest friends, I can think of 2 of my closest friends I've never physically met. Right. We've been friends for 6 years, and we've never physically met. And some of my other closest friends, like from New York or whatever, who have flown in to stay with me, or I've flown in to stay with them. But we met through being introduced by somebody like this. It's like
Absolutely.
amazing.
So you just reminded me. So connecting the dots on Adrian, the guy who did the movie about happiness, he's forwarded a CNN article about a guy who was stuck in Hong Kong called Thor Peterson. And he'd been traveling since 2013, trying to go to every country on the planet without catching an aeroplane. And he was up to 193 countries. And he got stuck in Hong Kong for 2 years because of COVID. And so I said, why don't you come and have a barbecue with us? And if you need somewhere to stay, all that, the usual stuff, right? He, on his business card, he says, a stranger is a friend you haven't met yet, something like that.
Yeah.
And, he's now up to, I've been following him online, and he's up to 199 countries. He eventually got to Australia, then he got to New Zealand. Now I think he's in Samoa or something. But he's another guy you should have a conversation with. He's amazing. Thor Peterson. Remind me to connect you to him.
That's so cool, though. What a great challenge.
Yeah.
Right? To not get on an airplane and go all those countries, like, wow.
And, he got married during that period. He had to live through, he missed a lot of weddings. He hasn't gone home in that period as well, right? He literally hasn't gone anywhere. He's just stayed on that path. So he's another fascinating guy that I hope everyone, ends up meeting at some stage.
So tell us about, because some people may not be watching, they may be listening to the podcast and not watching this on YouTube. Your t-shirt says Resolve, and behind your head are a set of wings. Tell us about that. So
I guess the wings and checkerboard patterns remind me of BMX, skateboarding, Vans, a lot of the brands that I grew up with, GT, SE Racing, Profile, they all had wings integrated. And to me, my BMX was my engine and my gateway to freedom. When you don't have a license and growing up in a small town. So that's always been part of my DNA, and I still ride skateboards and BMX. In fact, I've been mentioned before the show that a friend from business school and I are now doing Sunday skateboarding lessons out at the East Coast Skate Park in Singapore with the National Olympic coach. He's organizing all these coaches for us, and which is kind of surreal. But I get frustrated when people say, yeah, I used to enjoy that, skateboarding or golf or tennis. So, well, if you enjoyed it when you were young, why the hell wouldn't you keep doing it? Why would you ever give up on something that you enjoyed? So everything is, I guess, it's accumulating and it's compounding, and nothing is being passed off. Like your interests and your skills keep on growing. Like if you're a banker and you know how to to write a book, and you know how to do public speaking, and you know how to play golf and tennis and skateboard, each of those little things make you unique and make you interesting and eventually make you possibly valuable. Not that that's the end goal, but at the end of the day, I think my book is potentially a remedy for regret, because I don't think I can live my life the way I do and get to the end and say, gee, I wish I did this or that, because I did it. I said yes to go to the Augusta Masters when my neighbor suggested we go there. I said yes to go to Montpellier to a 500,000 person fees BMX skateboard event. I say yes to do a lot of things. The only things I tend to say no to, going back to your original thing, is if someone posts a message on LinkedIn and it's got 20 paragraphs of crap and they expect me to buy something at the end, then that's a hard no, of course.
Of course.
The other turn-off is, hey, we should chat. Here's my calendar so that you can find something that suits them. I'm like, that doesn't feel quite right. Let's have a chat first and then maybe, connect the calendar.
Yeah. When you were talking about things you used to enjoy and sort of embracing that idea, there's a sort of ageist idea with that goes along for most of us within our own heads. That, like you said about BMXing, I mean, that's a kid's thing, is the bias, right? And then you go, well, I enjoy it, so why wouldn't I do it? How do how would you address that with somebody who, in the context of business and leadership, because there's things they used to do, and I meet these people all the time, and I'm usually giving them a hard time about it, but well, I used to do this, but I'm not that age anymore. What do you say to them in that context of, you used to enjoy it, you're doing this? How do you approach them in that context?
I mean, I guess we kind of just mentioned it. Like I always say, look, if you enjoyed it then, why not now? And that's why the skateboarding initiative, the friend that I'm skateboarding with, Sunil, he's at Oracle, and I did a post on LinkedIn about us skateboarding, and all of his colleagues have suddenly reached out and said, "Hey, you skateboard? That's cool." And all of these, all of these conversations have started. And then I've encouraged him to go deeper. Like being vulnerable is also a core to, I think, leadership and being authentic as well. And there's a great platform that takes TEDx to another level. It's called Pekakucha or Pekacha, where you get 20 images, you get 20 seconds per image, and you've got to keep the story going. So I did one of those in 2015, and I think it's a great way to encourage people to tell their story, through photos, through images, and be concise. And it came out of I think it was an architecture firm in Tokyo that was sick of looking at boring presentations that went for hours. You got 6 minutes and 40 seconds to get it going. And it turns out a guy from Chicago is now the CEO of Pikachu, reached out to me, and I've done a small investment in that. I'm like, I want to see those guys succeed. But I just think it's a more fun platform. TEDx has a lot of rules and restrictions around what you can talk about. Pekakucha, Pikachu, you can talk about whatever you want. Creative mornings I love as well, because they get one guest speaker per month, 200 cities worldwide. I spoke about Invest at the beginning of 2020, I guess it was. But it wasn't about money. It was about what do you do with your time, energy, and attention? Do you go home and watch Netflix, or do you actually spend some time with a notebook and try and write the first draft of your book? Like invest the time when you're on a plane, or, to carry a notebook and connect the dots. A lot of this is, like, I had the content to write the book, I reckon, about 4 years after getting to Hong Kong. But it took another 6 years to find the right platform for me to have the discipline to do it. And Seth Godin was a big part of that. So Seth has a program called the Creatives Workshop. I'd already done the Alt MBA, which was a 1 month kind of accelerated workshop. The Creatives Workshop was better for me because it was about creating a 100-day streak in anything that you're trying to do. So if you're a musician, pick up your guitar every day for 100 days. If you're a poet, write a poem. For me, pick up my laptop and try to do 5 minutes of work on the book. And you put a dot in each. I literally had a piece of cardboard beside the bed, 10 by 10. I put a dot for every day that I did 5 minutes of work. And 100 dots later, I had the first draft of the book. And that was the hard work, because I had so much content, I just had to trim it back. And that's why, John Wood ended up giving me advice. He was like my pro bono writing coach. He said, make people want more, not, wish they had less. So there's a lot of stuff. And it was hard to cut it out, because it's like, so saying, here's your family, photo album, cut out a third of it. But you can repurpose all that stuff, in future drafts or books or whatever.
Of course. But, one of the things that you said that I think is so vitally important, I've talked about this a lot, that we live in a time which is kind of the cult of speciality, where everybody's supposed to be a specialist. And, you have to be the best at this, and you're this is your unique idea or your unique specialty. And I get it. Don't get me wrong. I understand it and I get it. But at the same time, the people who I enjoy the most are, to some degree, like myself, are polymaths. They're people who are interested in a bunch of things. And, one of the things about your challenge to people in all this work is exactly that, is like, you talked about looking for that common ground. So I was a BMX, I was a skateboarder, I was born in rural Australia, I went to university in a big city, I lived in Asia, I'm on this board, I play golf, and, there's not going to be a place where you can't find some common ground with anybody. And I think that's the challenge with specialization, is that oftentimes we say, well, I'll only have this conversation with you because, if you talk about finance, and I'm like, well, I'm out. I'm not interested. But will I talk about finance if you're interested in this? Yes, but it's a natural evolution of of another conversation. And I love that that's what you're putting forward in this idea of these productive accidents, is that you don't know. So you're going in to look for this common ground with and then what, and then
Yeah,
what, and then what. And,
exactly.
well,
There's
what
always an
happened?
and what. It's like
Yeah,
improv, right? Life is end
exactly.
and then. So I forgot to talk about resolve. So, the school in Tanzania got me interested in, solving poverty, as one idea, or helping other people. Then I met John Wood, Room to Read. Then I was helping with TEDx and curating the speakers because Gino asked me to help. And I helped a lady called Sunny Kang, who did a talk about overcoming perfectionism. She was a great musician, Yale scholarship holder, ended up quitting because she ended up not liking the whole process and being too hard on herself. But she rediscovered music via golf. I said, hey, I like golf. Let's have a game. 4 hours later, we ended up collaborating. She created a concert for the school in Tanzania. Fast forward beyond that, she's off to New York. Her husband works in an M&A lawyer and he got transferred. And I met a guy at a Chicago booth event. And I was the president of the alumni club by then because again, productive accidents. And I met a guy called George Matthew who was in Singapore. And he actually organizes concerts at Carnegie Hall once every year or 18 months for important causes. And I said, well, Sunny, wouldn't it be cool if she could perform for that concert at Carnegie Hall? That's her dream. Turns out George and I got on very well. The chairman of his board went to Chicago booth, and I'd been to that guy's house in Singapore in his wife's place for Thanksgiving. So fast forward, they invited me to go on the board of Music for Life. Then I brought George back to speak at TEDx Hong Kong. A month later, he went back to New York and he said, oh, by the way, I met a woman who's about to start an NGO in Hong Kong. You should meet her for coffee. That's Victoria, and she started Resolve Foundation. So I'm on the board of that. So, these things start to build momentum, as you can tell.
Yeah, they do. When you look at all of this, one of the things that I talk about is that people want, or people say they want change. As I like to say to people to boards when I'm brought in or executive teams, you all want change as long as you don't have to, right? And change tends to take place usually through some catalytic event that's usually unpleasant. So we realize, oh my God, we have to change. Okay. But to face that takes great vulnerability, takes the willingness to look at oneself. So to me, there's two forms of vulnerability. There's vulnerability with another, but you can't really have true vulnerability with another without having true vulnerability with yourself. How has vulnerability played in your life, and how does it play into this productive accidents idea? And
that's a great question, and it just reminded me of one of the core things that has been driving me, but it's always sort of unstated. So when we moved to Singapore back in 2001, 6 months later, my wife's youngest sister went missing in Australia, and this was Easter 2002. She's never been seen since. And
oh my goodness,
that is a level of ambiguous loss that no parent, no family would ever want to go through.
No.
But so my wife's the oldest of 7. I'm the youngest of 6. I'm just far enough removed from the situation to realize that it's important to capture the work of my sister-in-law Neve, who was 18 when she went missing. Great photographer, artist, music, poet, filmmaker, etc. And so the first book that I curated is called Missing Neve, Lessons from Loss, and it's a collection of her artwork. And I did it because there's a guy called Craig Wortman, he was a Chicago booth professor, now he's at Kellogg, and he wrote a book called What Is Your Story? And I bought it on the way to work because I just thought, oh, well, stories in a bank, that's interesting. This was like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I read the introduction and 3 sentences jumped out. Stories are your most valuable assets. They're more important than facts. If you don't write them down, they did not happen. That last one jumped out in particular. My dad was one of 14. Ridiculous, right? 5 boys, 2 girls, 5 boys, 2 girls. His 5 older brothers went to World War II, trained in Canada, went off to the UK, dropped bombs over Europe. They were shot down, presumed dead, POW. The war ends, all 5 survived. Only 2 of them wrote their books. So I've got PDF copies of those. They weren't published. They were just for their family.
Yeah.
But my kids will only know there were 2 because only 2 bothered to write their book. So that's what triggered me to go, well, I need to capture Neve's story because the only grandchild alive at that stage was our eldest daughter. who was, 3 years old when Neve went missing. Now there's, I don't know, another 15 kids that haven't met Neve, but hopefully through my book they can. But, and all of that, I guess, eventually led to the idea to write book number 2. You can't write a second book unless you've done the first. So somehow capture your family story. Everyone's got a unique story. Everyone should be writing. Like Seth Godin is great in terms of just write. The more you write, even if you think you're a bad writer, eventually there'll be something in there that you can combine into, a blog post or a story or an article, whatever it is.
When you confront your vulnerability, what is it about you that feels challenging to reveal?
Wow, that's a great question. I guess we always want the best for our children, right? But you also don't want to spoon feed them. You want them to make their own mistakes, and you learn more from your mistakes than your successes, for sure. And that's I think even it's ironic that we spoke about being a specialist, because my day job is a treasury specialist.
Yep.
I don't talk to clients, and yet I've got this ridiculous network. So there's this gap between what I think I'm capable of doing and what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I've been patiently trying to work my way through that, but I haven't cracked it yet. When I do, it'll be like, oh yeah, that was obvious. It was always going to happen. But in real time, that's something that is unfulfilled, that I need to work on. And when I first moved to Singapore, or just in this most recent 2 months, a former colleague reached out and said, oh, you need to meet this lady. She's written a book called Don't Quit Your Day Job. And it's about having stamina to persist in a corporate, bureaucratic sort of organization. Another friend forwarded me a great book years ago called Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And it's by a guy who worked at the greeting cards. What's it called? The famous greeting card company, Hallmark. And it's how he survived that. And these guys gave him his playground to be innovative, and he helped, make that company survive, probably. So I feel like I'm in that sort of category. I need to find a sponsor that is prepared to think a bit differently, that isn't looking for revenue today, but can understand you connect all these dots and you do it at scale. Then which company would you invest in? The one that stays in its own little silo, or the one that is open to the world? And I would love my employer to be more open to everything and to maximize the use of their network. I don't think we do it at the moment.
There's an author called, he was a specialist too. His name was Moshe Feldenkrais. I actually talked about him on some other podcasts that I've done. Moshe was a Israeli engineer who became a specialist in understanding somatic mechanics, how the body works. And his book was called The Elusive Obvious, because he would actually ask you to walk 20 steps away from him while he looked at you from the back, and then 20 steps towards him while he looked at you from the front, and then he'd do the same sideways. He'd look at you from the side and blah, blah, blah. And he would tell you exactly what was wrong with your body and how it was not working. Wow. And the book was called The Elusive Obvious, which is my favorite title of any book of any time. Because that's the work I do. My work is I can point out the elusive obvious in somebody's life. And because when people say to me, what's your goal when you're working with somebody? My goal, I'm going to get them to their emotional source code to find out what it is, blah, blah, blah. But the goal is at the end they go, oh, of course, right? It's like, of course, it's glaring. It's the elusive obvious. It's right in front of you. But because it's there, I think it's French, synonyme, which is it's under your nose. You can't see it. But this is our greatest vulnerability as humans is, my language is, you cannot be objective in a subjective reality. The fish cannot describe water, and you cannot tell what you're swimming in. And you're often swimming in your own poop. So it's like that moment that allows us that breath. And it's interesting in the context of what you've been talking about, Peter, because in the context of that, it's in these conversations where, I will often say, I've been asked about this on a particular mastermind that I run. And I said, here's the thing that I want you to understand. You don't know what you know. So people go, what do you mean? You don't actually know how much you know until somebody asks you a question. And this is why you need to have conversations with people who are not your usual people. So having a conversation, if you're in finance, with a neuroscientist, if you're a neuroscientist, having a conversation with a gymnast, if you're a gymnast, having a conversation with a librarian is going to allow you to describe things and to be evocative around things that are within you. You didn't know you knew until they asked you. And they go, oh my God, thank you for that answer. You're like, no, thank you for that question. And that's what I love about your productive accidents is it's actually a series of let me find out what I know by asking questions, not let me find out what I know by giving answers. But it's like by asking greater questions, I can find out what people don't know about themselves, and they can ask me questions, and I can discover what I don't know about me. So I'm always fascinated. Like, wow, I hadn't thought about that, or never thought about that in that way until you asked me. Now it's like, bam! So it's very powerful.
I love it. Questions are the best, right? The best invention,
Absolutely.
Potentially.
And that's why my religion is over my shoulder. Stay curious.
Cool.
My curiosity is my religion. Live by it.
Fantastic.
All right, mate. Well, it's been a joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much. Again, I want to make sure that people know how they can find out about you, about your book, and how they can get in touch with you and find out about all the different things that you do. Please let people know where they can find out about you. We'll, of course, post it in the show notes, but please tell them.
Sure. I think to connect to me personally, let's just go straight to LinkedIn. Peter B. Williams. There's a B in the middle just to distinguish from all the other Williams. Peter Williams is up there. My book and audio book are on Kindle and on Amazon, so you can download that anytime. And I do have a website, peterbwilliams.com, so it's got a bunch of my adventures and my approach to the way I live and learn. And I really do look forward to connecting with anyone. I hope someone reaches out and says, hey, I heard you on Dov's podcast, and this is what we should talk about next. And have you thought about X, Y, and Z? And the adventure continues.
Fabulous. Thank you, Peter. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Though remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of that tribe, whether it's business or political leadership. If you want to shape that landscape, you've got to tap into what drives human behavior. And you can tap into the groundbreaking understanding of how you can apply the anatomy of meaning extracted from the emotional source code of you as an individual, of your organization, or even of your nation to change everything. I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and for companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you need to say yes more to get out of your comfort zone so that you can have more productive accidents. Who knows what awaits you when you put yourself at risk of having one of those highly productive accidents where you meet your new best friend or your new business partner, or you learn something you never knew before. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.